Good morning, everyone. Thank you for joining me this Saturday morning. We usually start these day texts around 7 a.m. Sometimes on Saturday, I start a little later, but if you see the notice, that's pretty much when it's going to start, give or take 10 minutes. Sometimes I get caught doing a few things that just take a little bit longer, and but I do my best to be prepared right around 7 or the scheduled time. And so if you're unable to join us for the live stream, that's okay. You're probably watching the video later. So when we do these day text shows live, we consider the biblical text primarily, but we also at times consider other related material, and we do other types of review shows as well. Not as often. Occasionally, I'll do a live stream about a subject or a movie or a topic like Sons of God or Michael the Archangel. But usually, like those last two, it involves something related to the Bible because that's what we're interested in. This channel is primarily designed to educate people about the biblical texts and other related texts, histories, documents that have credibility, documents that have been preserved orally and in writing over a long period of time, and that can be verified at different points throughout that period using both different texts that write about the same thing but that are far apart in terms of their dating, yet they're consistent, archaeology when it comes to locating places that these texts speak about and describe, but like places such as the city of Ur were not known until the last 100 or 200 years. So the Bible, even though it's been like other holy books, you could say kind of belittled, because a lot of people today, for whatever reason, seem to promote a non-scientific view about the origin of life. Excuse me. Meaning the evolution of life. And I don't mean by that changes over time within our species. I mean that people today who claim to believe in science, that is something that you can show is repeatedly the same over the period of time under the same conditions. So something like gravity you can test. Well, there's no evidence showing that life can evolve from non-life, and there's all evidence showing life only comes from existing life. And so for some reason, scientists and others neglect that obvious scientific fact, which, if they were to accept, would not only prevent them from spending all that time on trying to figure out what the origin of life is in terms of life from non-life, but it would open the doorway for them to understand how life is eternal, and then to look at creation as creation and not as an accident, something that formed over time from nothing, ultimately. But we believe everything came from Jah, the Creator, the life who gave life to life, and that we can show exists scientifically because we're here. We're alive. If we're alive now, then someone must have given us life before. That's a scientific fact. So all you have to do is go all the way back, and what people tend to do, we'll get to the reading in just a moment, but it's a Saturday show, so I want to give a little bit more of an intro for maybe any new ones. And people who are just watching want to hear some of the things that we believe and why before we get to these texts that further codify our beliefs. But basically, it's not a question of who gave life to God, right? No one was. We can only go so far back, even in our own physical universe. But the fact that we can't answer that question is nullified by the fact that it's not a question we have to answer. Because if life can only give life to life, then there's no reason to believe life ultimately had to be given life. You see what I'm saying? In other words, the question assumes a break in the chain, but there is none. We're alive. That wouldn't be possible if life didn't always exist scientifically, because life only comes from existing life. You see what I'm saying? So just because we can't grasp the totality of what that involves, since we were given life, that doesn't mean we can't prove life is eternal like we just did. And then from there show that bilateral symmetry and all the other things involved in what we see around us, the Earth itself, the atmosphere, space, solar systems, galaxies, everything has marks of design and intelligence, at least in our view. And when you accept that as part of the scientific truth that life is eternal, well, now you have eternal intelligent life. And that eternal intelligent life is who we identify throughout history, our brief history, which is defined by metallurgy, the use of metals, astronomy, and language. You cannot date our existence using those three things farther back than 6,000 years, 6,000 years. So people need to come to grips with that. These ideas and beliefs based on datings of fossils, not fossils really, the sediments surrounding the fossils, because you can't date stone. So they date the sediments surrounding the fossilized bone. And then they come up with all these dates that are so far back, puts everything out of place. When even there's a famous case of a man who had a lamp. I'll put a link in the description below if I don't get too busy or someone remind me. Or you can look it up. Just type Nazi lamp of human skin. And you'll find a link to a person who owned the lamp and who went all the way around the world to try to find out if it was human skin, that the Nazis made, or something else. And he got like 4 or 5, maybe more, different conclusions from scientific studies based on sediments taken from the lamp. Why? Because there were different, sediments or particulate matter that had aggregated to become a part of the lamp. And the lamp, I think, ended up being like pigskin or something like that. So when someone actually tested a definitive piece of the lamp tissue, they were able to do it. But I think others were trying not to disturb the lamp. I haven't watched the video in a long time, but it's worth watching. It's a good one. Maybe we'll do a show about it, and I'll highlight certain points. But essentially, it shows that even a lamp that's taken and tested several times by different people, because he wanted to find out if this was really a human skin lamp. And they couldn't even date it properly according to the light, relatively or comparatively light film of sediment on the lamp. Now think of a fossil in the earth and all the earth surrounding it, all the sediment that you have, and they're dating that. I mean, you've got so much material from times so far. The earth, according to the Bible, as we'll see when we get into Genesis, it's not far off. The earth was created before us, according to what the Genesis account says. So it along with everything else beyond the human species, is much older. So dating the material, that would be like going to Mars today, making it habitable, using the existing planetary material, but now you're making it be like God creating it there, and then making life on Mars. The life is not going to be as old as Mars. Okay, and if you made trees and different things that existed before you made the humans and things, then you'd have all kinds of sedimentary material, just like you see in the progression of the creation in the biblical account. So these dates and things, what I'm getting at, are not reliable. Things like metallurgy, astronomy, and writing are reliable. And that's why we use them, and they corroborate what the Bible says, versus even what some believe is written in the Sumerian king lists, cuneiform tablets that talk about thousands of years of reigns. But these are some of our most difficult documents to properly interpret. Whereas the text we have is brought from by Moses and others as they left Egypt, what was the center of knowledge after the flood, since they migrated south through Sumer into Egypt and carried all that knowledge with them. Moses was raised in the house of the Pharaoh. They knew all the ancient histories and accounts. And so that's why he wrote those down. He knew those things, and he was speaking to God according to the biblical account in the mountain. So part of the story, if you're going to accept anything involving John history, involves communication with various human beings, like Moses. Okay, so we go from life that gives life to life eternal intelligent because everything shows the marks of symmetry, design, and purpose, utility. We're not just walking around for nothing. Well, some people are today, but you know what I'm saying. We have a purpose, we have a function, and we have gifts to give to the earth, and it gives us things. But then in history, we see that Jah's the one who's been actively involved with humanity since we lost that connection with what he gave us. And so everything since then has been trying to get our way back. And so we believe we went through this process of living and dying because we did bad and chose the wrong things, which Jah allowed us to do, but that there's a consequence to. And that ultimately through Moses, he gave people laws and a doctrine to follow, to be closer to him, until we could be properly purchased back in the way we were lost. This is our view. I'm giving you a brief summary because we're getting into the Revelation here. And I often will just start, but sometimes like a Saturday morning, I want you to understand why we come to this text at all. Who are we talking about when he says, my God? Well, see, now you have a little bit more understanding. What is New Jerusalem? You're going to read some of these things in today's text. So now I'm hoping that at least you see in our view what all this is a part of and why we're reading it in the first place. So we believe Revelation is sort of like further along in the history of Jah's involvement with people through to the time of Jesus, whom we believe was his son sent from heaven, and lived as a man so he could do what we talked about, be what Adam wasn't. He's even called the last Adam. In other words, he was killed for no good reason, but Adam was. And Satan was going through this process of accusing and judging us because we inherited that same condition until Jesus came and showed he was wrong, because he didn't do anything wrong and the devil killed him anyway, or had other people do it. This is our view. I'm bringing you to it so you now see what we're getting at when we talk about Jesus as the resurrected one, as this being now, because the one he's talking to is John, one of his disciples, many believe. And this is, in many people's view, near the end of the first century. And he's giving him information about different groups of Christians who had developed from the activity of people like Paul, Peter, John. All of these people were working together and spreading this message. It's called the Great Message or Gospel. That's what that means. And the great message is that we're no longer required to keep dying forever with no hope. And while people had hope in the past, if they followed the law in their heart and they did what they knew they were made to do, people can always have hope. But the hope we now have is one where we're not in expectation of someone coming to deliver us. We believe that already happened. Okay, that's the difference between us and Jewish people. Although many Jews would believe that the nation of Israel is often spoken of in many messianic texts. So they have their own views in different ways. But I'm bringing you our understanding of these texts. So now let's get to the reading. You have this broader view now of why we meet, why we believe in this God Jah. It's just a summary, right? I mean, there's a lot more information, but we're really here for these day texts. And I don't usually start the day text with a lot of preliminary discussion about these things. Sometimes if it's related. But because it's Revelation and because we talk about material at times, that for people who don't read these texts as much as we do, it may seem a little disconnected from life unless you put it in context and you see it in relation to all these different events. And so that's what I'm hoping that you have now as we begin. Verse 7, Revelation chapter 3. So he's already given several messages to several different groups of Christians. Some of whom he approved in different ways, some of whom he disapproved in different ways. Told them what they needed to do to get it right. Or he was going to deal with them. He was not going to keep approving them in ways where they could openly defy him and and deny his name. You'll see as he talks to these here in what is known as the congregation of Philadelphia. All right, verse 7, chapter 3. To the messenger of the Christians gathered in Philadelphia, you must write, the sacred one, the true one, he who possesses the key of David, because the Messiah was to come in the line of David, the one who opens and no one will close, the one closing and no one can open, says these things. In our view, Jesus has been given all authority and power, but that doesn't mean that the devil and other spirit sons of God do not have authority underneath him, that he has to tolerate as this world and the system of things continues and ultimately concludes. So Jah is the one who originally allowed for all of the different sons to have authority over these nations, as we've talked about before with texts such as Deuteronomy 32:8, the Dead Sea Scroll, and early Greek reading, as well as the book of Daniel, where you essentially see that acted out, where you have different princes, sons of God, with authority over different nations. And Michael is given authority and is the prince, the great prince of Israel. And we believe he's the one who ultimately came as God's son through the line of David and gave his life, was resurrected, and is talking to us now, or talking to John through his angels, according to Revelation 1. Verse 8, this is what he says. I have come to know your works. Behold, I have placed before you a door which has been opened. No one is able to close it. Since you do possess a little power, and you closely guarded my message, you also did not deny or refuse my name. Now let's take a look here for a moment. So there's a door he's opened for them. No one can interfere with their decision to what? It looks like the door's been opened so they can either go through it or not, right? No one can close it and no one can open it unless he does it. That's the power. So it doesn't matter what other people do. If he opens this door for you, it matters whether you walk through that door. Verse 9, behold, I will bring out from Satan's assembly or synagogue those who talk about themselves. Those who talk about themselves as if they are Jews, but they are not. On the contrary, they lie. Who does this remind you of? Verse 2, right? Revelation 3:2, where he said, you put to the test, or is it 2:3? Either way, in Revelation 2 or 3, he says, you put to the test those who claim to be my apostles or official representatives, and he's approving them for doing so. But he says, you found out they're not. In fact, you found out they lie. Those also were talking about themselves. Whenever you find people talking about themselves overly in ways, I mean, we want to obviously identify to some extent, but there's an excessive degree of self-proclamation. And I think we see it in a lot of different groups today, right? I mean, clearly, for as much good as the Watchtower may have done, they talk about themselves all the time in ways that put them above or different from you or I. It's just a fact. And they believe that. Fine. On the contrary, they lie. Watch out as I bring them out, so they come and bow low. Proskuneo. Before your feet, so they may come to know I love you. Isn't that interesting? So Jesus here is going to make those who claim to be something show that they're not, and he's going to have them honor the ones who really are, but who don't go running around talking about it all the time. In fact, he's going to do it so much so because he loves them, right? The reason he says he's doing this, the end of verse 9, so they may come to know I love you. He's going to have these other people who aren't what they say they are, they're lying, proskuneo, bow low in royal homage, just like Hebrews 1:6 says, would be done to God's firstborn. Do you think God loves his firstborn? Well, Jesus says he's going to have these people proskuneo to these other people because he loves them. I'm pretty sure that when Jah has people proskuneo his son, his firstborn in Hebrews 1:6, it's because he loves him. Verse 10, since you closely guarded the message about my refusal to give up, because you keep talking about how he did not fail the Father and was put to death for no reason, because you closely guarded that message about his refusal, you're making it clear to people, this one came, this one did, this one didn't quit. That's our message, salvation through him, praise Jah. Because you did this, or are doing this, I will closely guard you, so you are not exposed to the hour of trial or time of testing, which is about to come upon the entire known world, to test those living upon the earth. The great test. Verse 11. No, well, let's focus more back, since we're kind of going verse to verse. So if we keep doing this, see, it doesn't matter what other people think. Let them have it. What do they really have? Doesn't seem like much to me unless it's really based on true love, truth, love for Jah, love for each other in ways that don't seek to take advantage, lie, steal, corrupt. Come on. If you're closely guarding the message about that one, the one who came and did all these things for Jah versus the other sons of Jah who came and did all those things for themselves, if you're closely guarding the message about that one, he is going to closely guard you. Verse 11, swiftly I arrive. You must keep what you have under close watch, so no one may take your prize. Oh, we talked about that. I think in one of our prior shows we talked about the account where Jesus talked about the oil and how some had oil and others had run out of oil or were running out of oil. And so they went to the ones who didn't waste their oil and said, give us some of your oil. Right? I mean, that would be a difficult thing because we're taught to help other people, right? The same person who gives this illustration about the oil gives us the illustration about not, saying no to those who are in need. Even giving the example of the woman who kept knocking at the door of the judge late at night. And he finally just, even though he didn't want to, he did it. That's how far he went with his illustration on giving. My point is, or responding to people in need. My point is, the illustration about the oil is the opposite of that. Yeah, there are times when we are supposed to get up late at night and help people who need us. But you do not give away your oil. Your oil is your prize. The prize you got for closely guarding the message. They did not. Okay, so you don't give away your pearls to people who trampled on pearls when they had them. You don't give your prize away that you work or are working so hard to maintain, to keep, not earn, keep, right? Not have your name blotted out. Because if you're doing what you're supposed to be doing, it's written in. But you don't want to blot it out if someone takes your crown because you refuse to closely guard the message. Because other people wanted your oil so badly, they kept arguing with you about things that didn't involve you closely guarding the message. What's the message? The message is that Jesus, the Son of God, came. 1 John, his whole letter. We've read it in our day text together. And that's what we proclaim. You closely guard that message that he came, that he was the one promised all the way back in Eden. We're going to get to texts later or further that are part of that series of pre-Christian evidence, but we have it. And so we guard that message. He guards us. Don't let other people take our prize. Okay, last verse. This is the big one. And this is kind of why I started out the way I did. In addition to it being, Saturday, And I think people are just not maybe as in a rush. Either way, verse 12. I will make, okay, this is the Son of God talking. This is the one from Revelation 1 who became dead and came to life, the first and the last. Not like Isaiah, totally different, grammatically and contextually. Has the keys of death and Hades. And will give to those who prevail to eat from the tree in the garden of God. This is the one who's talking, verse 12. I will make the one who prevails, not the one who just believes. We know belief is important. Belief is not prevailing, though, unless you believe all the way to the end. That's what prevailing means. No one thinks of prevailing as something that happens at the start. Either way, some maybe do, but we don't. I will make the one who prevails a part of the support structure or permanent fixture, a pillar, in the temple of my God. And it is not likely that that person will ever leave the temple. I will write upon that person the name of my God and the name of my God's city, the New Jerusalem, the city which is coming down out of heaven from my God, as well as my new name. Now that we'll talk about that last part in just a moment, but let's reflect here for a moment. Multiple times, the first and the last, the one who became living and who died and has the keys of death and Hades, but that's totally different from Isaiah 44:6, says, my God. He says he's going to write upon the person who prevails the name of my God. Now later in this same text, we're going to read that name of that God. It's Jah, Revelation 19, at least the shortest form, the least disputable form. And whether it's that name or the full name or the three-letter form, the point is he knows the name. The idea, right? See, a lot of times people who like to take issue with the use of the divine name in the New Testament or by Jesus will cite text where Jesus says, Father, I glorified your name. And people will say, well, name can mean, a character or a person, and that's true. That's why when Jesus says in the name of the Father, in the name of the Son, name of the Holy Spirit, the Holy Spirit is not clearly a person. It may be, though, in a way that where in the name really represents, and in another text this is the case, the authority. It's similar to how we use it today in the name of the law. But it can also mean actual name, of course. But here it's clear, right? I will write the name of my God. That's clear. That's not in the name of as in the character or person, or I glorified his character. He's writing the name of his God. The idea that he didn't know how to write that name or didn't write it while he was alive on earth is, in our view, just not consistent with the evidence, which shows that he quoted the Old Testament text without any variation, and that those Old Testament texts, all the existing copies that we have that are datable to his time and before, have the divine name. And there's no reason Jesus wouldn't have used the name. The Bible doesn't say anything about not using the name properly or to promote Jah. Now, this New Jerusalem, this city which comes down out of heaven, we'll talk about later, it's further described, is the thing which will replace all of the existing governmental authorities in ways that Jah's authority will, through his Son and those who are with him, radiate righteousness. And the whole earth will be to Jah's glory, not to our own glory and destruction. We will bring, as we'll read later, the glory of the earth that Jah made into New Jerusalem, which was probably what we were supposed to do in the first place. That New Jerusalem, or whatever Jerusalem, whatever would have been the place like Eden that we would have taken the glory of the earth. We just never we didn't get to that point. We couldn't even get them out of the garden procreating to the point where there would be people bringing in the glory of the earth. They hadn't cultivated it enough yet. Or like I said, procreated. But that's the whole point. I think that's why the resistor chose that moment. The one possessing an ear must listen to what the Spirit says to the gathered Christians. So, let me just comment more on this last part, verse 12. Now, some people will bring up the issue. So we've talked about Michael and Jesus, how the descriptions are very similar between Daniel 10 and Revelation 1. Michael is the Prince of Israel, one of the foremost princes among the sons of God, given an inheritance among the nations. Jude, Paul both talk about Jesus being the angel, the God, a God, just like Judges 13, 20 through 22 says they saw God ascend in the flames and it was the angel of Jehovah. Same angel as in Jude, according to P72, the earliest text. Calls him a God, the Christ a God, who led the Israelites through the wilderness. And Paul says basically the same thing. And the accounts have that angel speaking as the angel and as Jah. So this new name. Now, okay, so if Jesus is Michael, right? Well, that's his name there, or a name of his. And then he also had that name. Even Jude says, or I believe it's Jude says that he was disputing with the devil over Jesus' body. And it may be James or Jude that refers to him as Christ as a God in P72. But they both refer to him in either case as that angel, and or he refers to Michael as being there with the devil and Moses, so that far back. But this new name, okay, so John, we know in John 1:1 he uses logos. And even in Revelation it says that his name is revealed as the Word of God, the Logos of God. So I'm just giving you my preliminary view based on some evidence. I believe the new name is the Word, the Logos of God. And that's why John opens his gospel that way, not with Michael. But that doesn't mean he's not Michael. It just means he has a new name that John is using. And I believe that name is given to us further in this revelation. So we'll talk more about it. But I believe that is why we don't use or see terms often like wisdom or Michael. We see the Word. With the same texts are cited involving Michael and wisdom, right? Jesus cites text that he says wisdom says this, and then another account, it's him saying that. Paul calls him the wisdom of God. The text from Proverbs 8 specifically describe things that are said about him multiple times in the New Testament, being the one through whom God made things. The verb for create in Colossians 1 is passive. That means someone else created through the Word, or Jesus as the firstborn. He didn't create. Okay, the verb shows that. The verb form in Colossians 1, 16, 17 shows that, for create. So I wanted to point that out because whether or not that is the new name, it's not essential. But I believe that helps make sense of why we see Logos in John 1:1, and why later in Revelation you're going to see he's revealed as, with the name, the Word of God. That's the name that is written on him. And it's the name I think he says he's going to reveal here. So keep that in mind. It's not essential. I know all the non-Jesus Michael people will freak out, of course. But I don't see any problem with that. It says right here he's going to get a new name. So likely then, the name that is more regularly used by John in his writings from this point in Revelation and in his gospel, Logos, is probably that new name. But we'll find out more as we continue the reading. And hopefully you can join me again Monday and we'll consider these texts further. Now about tomorrow's show, I'm going to put up a notice in a couple hours for tomorrow's open session. And it's going to be basically all about the Bible. Well, I guess I'm not sure. I'll probably title it The Watchtower, the Bible, and Blood. I don't see how I can avoid including the Watchtower in the title or as a focus of the discussion, because they're the ones who make the biggest issues over blood and have for a long time. Whereas most people just recognize what those texts state and the context in which they state them, which we'll talk about more tomorrow. So, and of course, I've written about them. You're free to look at my topical index for some preliminary discussion that I've done in the past. Just go under a B. You should be able to find blood transfusions, or go under G for Greg Stafford articles. Man, I think there's a chapter from one of my JWD editions, JWD 2, I believe. If you go under J, JWD chapters, you might find my entire chapter on blood there. So some good thoughts, I hope, that will help you. But we're going to talk about it for up to 2 hours tomorrow, if the conversation lasts. So I'll put the notice up here and within a couple hours. If you want to share that notice, you think there's somebody who might benefit from the discussion, because there are a lot of people confused about blood in the Bible, and many people either are really devoted to the Watchtower and the non-use of blood in their view, how they view it, but don't fully understand some of the issues, or there are people who have become so disillusioned with the Watchtower and their blood policy that they've abandoned belief in Jah and the Bible. So we have to deal with it so that there's some further record of what the Bible teaches, and hopefully it will help people who are bothered or affected by that issue. So until then, I thank you all for joining me. Have a wonderful weekend, and we'll start tomorrow probably around 9:30. So share the notice, try to get as many people as you can if they're involved with this issue, and I will see you tomorrow for our open discussion.